This is Dateline News and Conversation. My guest tonight is Ben Toth. He's from Hungary. We're going to talk about a number of things that are on my mind and that are in the news, specifically about the position of Hungary within NATO and the EU vis-a-vis Ukraine. The Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, has been very vocal and public. We're going to talk about the cracks in the EU and NATO. How can Germany and the rest of the EU remain with the United States after what has been happening? Russia, through its spokesperson in the Kremlin, said Russia will fill its special military operation goals. We'll talk about that and see what Ben has to think about whether or not that's the goal or realistic. And then we're going to talk about another attack on Moscow this morning. Several drones got through. President Putin reportedly said, "We did an okay job, but we've got to do better." My question is, where are these drones coming from? And then we're going to talk about a big story that is beginning to emerge here in Russia. It's bird flu that was released from the United States biolabs in Ukraine. And then what is going on in Serbia and Kosovo? It seems that NATO, again, is escalating tensions there. My guest tonight, Ben Toth. Ben, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be back. Thank you for having me back. And hello, friends of Crimea.
Thank you very much. All right, let's start. What is going on in your country and with your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban?
Well, he is, of course, they say right-wing, sort of conservative leader, which is true, but he is a realist. And meaning, what is a realist? He looked around in the world and the G7, I mean, Germany is officially in recession with the gas prices 9 or 10 times that of the Russian gas was, you know, with the blown up pipeline. And they see that's the economic heart of Europe, and it's spluttering to a halt. It's near collapse. I mean, it is going down. So we need friends. We need energy security. We need food security. And that is what he's doing. So he's become a realist in criticizing NATO because they apparently don't want to set foot in Ukraine. They just want to send the next Wunderwaffe, the next super weapon that's going to change the tide of war, but with no will to fight it other than the crazy Poles and a couple of the Baltic midgets. And Hungary wants no part of it, something I'm very glad for. I voted for him. And when it comes to foreign policy, I completely agree with King Viktor Orban, or even if you call him Sultan, like Erdogan, who just got re-elected, because he's done playing the East and West game. Just two recent mind-blowing agreements have been signed. One was in Oman, Qatar. We have an energy deal with them because the transit via Ukraine, the transit prices have gone up like 3 times over the course of the war, the gas and oil coming from Russia. And we have an agreement with Rosatom, the Russian state nuclear, civil nuclear industry, to build Pokshketu, our second nuclear reactors, which will make our country energy independent from Europe's grid. We might even be exporting energy. So these are the wonderful moves. And as well as, I think a 400 million agreement with China, the largest electronic vehicle battery factory. I forgot to jot down the title. He's going to open a factory in Hungary. So he's the realist. He wants Hungary to survive, to have a future. And for that, I couldn't be happier that he is where he is during times like this, because many of your viewers might not know this. He came from the globalist background. He took Soros grants. He went to London to study law. He was one of those chosen people. But then he rebelled, which is a great thing. He got rid of the Soros foundations in Hungary, of the Central European University, numerous NGOs. But half of the media is still against him. Half of the newspapers you read are sort of, they are consuming and repeating the EU blobs attacks. You know, we are undemocratic, democratic backsliding, the same critiques that have been made earlier of Poland, but have now been cancelled, yet they still owe us money, even from the pandemic era. and the critiques within the EU of the EU are growing. Just last week, I saw the president of Croatia saying we've been in this organization for 10 years and it hasn't done us any good. Obviously, we will get to Vučić and Serbia, the only country in Europe that hasn't sanctioned Russia. And these splits are indeed growing. And I'm glad to be on, let's say, the peace camp, at least projecting on the world stage, like China does, that we want nothing but a peaceful resolution. But whatever we do, we are not committing troops, arms, or anything other than humanitarian aid, which I think is the right position for, a country of 10 million people, a tiny country. That is the right position to take. And I support it.
So it sounds to me, you described Orban as a realist. And to me, that translates into I'm putting my country and my people first.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
It is. And we have numerous disagreements. As you know, I'm a communist on domestic policy issues with education, we can say, and medicine. But on foreign policy, he has been nothing but pragmatic for the last 2 years. And yeah, I completely agree. With the sun is shining on the east, with the BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, these huge arraignments of countries. That is the future, of the heart of the world. And we should have friends there. We should belong there.
Okay. You also mentioned some cracks in the EU and NATO, not only with your Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, but Erdogan, who was just re-elected in Turkey, he has not gone along with the narrative. He has sought to continue relationships with Russia in trade. They signed a new deal for a new pipeline transit through Turkey. He's got a lot of problems of his own, but he's not following the NATO United States official narrative. So how do you see, and by the way, you've got Macron in France, who's been saying for some time, we need to have our own army, our own defensive army. There are other countries that remain pretty silent, but these, to me, appear to be cracks in the EU, NATO, US relationship. Your thoughts on that?
I believe, let's start with Emmanuel Macron, because he was charmed in China. He went to visit Xi Jinping along with Ursula von der Leyen, the queen of the EU, the Wicked Witch, tagging along for the first meeting. And they met around a big Chinese round table, like 3 meters, with a Chinese garden in the middle, sort of a visual message to Josep Borrell, who said Europe is the garden and the rest of the world is the jungle. I think marvelously done. And then Xi Jinping sent Ursula von der Leyen packing, just go through the regular airport and go home. And then he took Macron by the arm and took him around the country to his grandfather's residence and said, look, you can have an independent EU policy and you could be free of the US domination. And it appeared to have worked. For about a week, the news cycle was about strategic sovereignty of Europe, and we should have our own path and not follow the US, maybe even our own armed forces. But then a couple of weeks, it just disappeared. And now there's just aid and more weapons. So I don't know what kind of enormous pressure they have on many of these leaders, like Scholz, for instance. He's basically, I don't know how to call him, the hostage of the US. I mean, blowing up your multi-billion pipeline, the lifeline to your economy, and not even complaining about it, not even questioning it, and not revealing the investigations. I have no idea how captured Germany could get. But there are cracks, as you said, because the South, the Balkan Peninsula, which we'll touch upon later, is very realistic, including, Hungary, a bit of the Czech and Slovaks. But after that, you get to the crazies, the new NATO proxies, basically Poland and the Baltic midgets. They want to join this war for some reason or the other. They want to be the next US proxy. But these divisions, I don't think the pressure, it's got to tear this thing apart. NATO for sure. The EU in its current form, I'm not sure it can last more than a couple of years. But, as you see, a lot of it has been captured. And China, very interestingly, wrote about this, including the situation in Kosovo and Metohija, saying there are 2 war zones in Europe. made by the USA. The first was exploded in Ukraine, and the second is about to explode. And China, surprisingly but very promisingly, has made huge diplomatic efforts to say to be on the side of Serbia, saying respect the sovereignty and the borders of Serbia, and basically stop the provocation from the other side, from Albin Kurti and the Pristina authorities, which was great for me to see, because for me personally, yesterday watching this video of K4 troops, which is a NATO arm, we don't have control over that. Orban doesn't, ministry, our president doesn't. It's a NATO project. We're fighting with unarmed Serbs in Kosovo, and they got their ass kicked, thank goodness. But Hungarians should never be there in the first place. Sorry, I went to that topic, which we'll get back to later. But within Europe, that's what I'm hopeful for, because China has shown through diplomacy it can create peace, and as they say symbolically, as the shadow of U.S. influence shrinks, the light of peace spreads. That is what I'm hopeful for in the immediate area, that they can't actually explode the Balkans.
Yeah, well, China is working the diplomatic side really intensively of late. Look what they just did with the Saudis and Iran.
Amazing.
And Syria now has been invited to the Arab League for their meeting on, I forget what it was. It might have been climate change or something or other later in the year. And then Russia has been working the diplomatic side for the last several years all over the globe, in Africa and South America.
Both leaders are in Africa. I think Xi Jinping is in the Democratic Republic of the Congo now. Sergei Lavrov is somewhere in Africa. I think it's his 10th visit just this year. They are working intensively.
Yeah. So the march away from the United States hegemon in a unipolar world towards a multipolar world is accelerating rapidly. I describe it now as not even fifth gear, but warp speed. I just read today that 19 countries are wanting to join BRICS, BRICS Plus. That's an ominous sign, I think, to the United States, the collective West, to Europe. The thing that really amazes me, you touched on the pipeline. Not a peep from Germany, Olaf. Not a complaint, nothing. And this is wrecking their economy. Germany's economy has been built on cheap Russian gas. They blow up the pipeline to Germany that was going to transport this cheap fuel to keep Germany running, powerful, their economy growing, and not a word. I think there's only one way to explain that, Ben, but what do you think it is?
I haven't seen a sadder case of, I wouldn't even call him the weakest Bundeskanzler, the Chancellor, but he's a complete hostage. I remember before the explosions, he was standing next to Joe Biden, when Biden said, we have ways and we're going to get rid of that pipeline if Russia enters Ukraine. And he didn't even fire back or question anything, even back then. And then it blew up. And then 3 nations get to investigate them, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany, and they can't share that intel even with their allies. I mean, it stinks to high heaven. Everybody, I think that every one of your viewers knows who blew up the pipeline. Even Seymour Hersh did his remarkable job of at least bringing that story down. Well, the narrative of the 5 people on a yacht, the Andromeda yacht, which they're still sticking with, it makes zero sense. And it's just sad, because I grew up, I'm a weirdo because I loved both the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia to our west, and the GDR, the Democratic Republic, the German, the East German Republic, wonderful place. And there were proud people there. And it's just sad. There are still marching people, people protesting against the war, against sending ammunitions and to rebuild the pipeline. But they don't get listened to in the political circles. It's just a completely captured colony of the US. I don't know of any other way to put it. I mean, their votes, not their votes, their interests are not taken into account. Their well-being not taken into account. Same goes for Britain, which is war mad, but also in a huge recession. I mean, you can't get eggs in most German towns. There's hundreds of pubs have filed for bankruptcy and closed forever. Poland closed, I think, around a 400-year-old porcelain factory. It's remarkable, and they just go along with seppuku, with harakiri, with destroying their economies. And we don't want to be on that list. That's the simplest way I can put it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's obvious that the United States still wields tremendous amount of power,
Yes.
militarily and economically, with the pressure that they can bring to bear on countries with the threats of sanctions if you step out of line. Um, this dog still has teeth, and he's backed into a corner, and he's very dangerous now, which we can see all over the world. He's striking out recklessly, desperately, wherever the United States feels it's losing influence or it's threatened. I mean, we can see what's happening between Georgia and Abkhazia, between Azerbaijan and Armenia. We're seeing the same thing in Serbia and Kosovo. And let's segue now to Ukraine. It's the same thing in Ukraine, only all-out war has broken out.
Yes.
Now, I want your opinion on this, Ben. President Putin, Lavrov have been adamant from the beginning. Russia will fulfill the special military operation goals. They are to demilitarize Ukraine, to denazify Ukraine, and to ensure neutrality in Ukraine, that it'll never join NATO. And just recently, Dmitry Peskov, spokesperson for the Kremlin, reiterated and repeated those three goals. Now, people around the world are talking about, there's going to be a peace agreement. There's going to be a compromise. In my opinion, I want your opinion on this. Russia is not backing down from the three goals for this special military operation. And I believe there will be no compromise. What there will be is Russia will sit down at the table and dictate the terms of the conclusion of this conflict. What are your thoughts on that, Ben, as you sit there in Hungary?
I completely agree that it will come to an end, because when we talk about compromise and agreements with the West, people forget this is a 9-year war that Russia is finishing. It began in 2014 with the Maidan coup by Victoria Nuland and others, and it has been shelling the people of Donbass for more than 9 years. The burning people in Odessa. There is just no forgetting or forgiving this. And what was on the table then, called Minsk II, were guarantees by the West, by Angela Merkel, by François Hollande, by the UN, as well as Belarus and Russia, that there would be talks with the people in what they call the separatist regions, now the new oblasts of Russia, basically the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. And all of the time, like proudly they said, Angela Merkel said, it wasn't meant in good faith. We didn't want peace. We were there to strengthen Ukraine, and Ukraine's armed forces to attack Russia. That was her point. And that's what François Hollande says. If I were Putin, would I trust a written agreement or even a verbal agreement like the one where they promised NATO would not go 1 inch to the east when the Warsaw Pact was undone? Why? What was that? Are you okay?
Yeah,
Hello?
everything's fine.
Okay, there was some sort of sound anomaly. Why would you trust an agreement incapable West? So sadly, and this really is with sorrow for me, but this has to be concluded. Russia has been targeting only military and logistics targets to weaken the armed forces of Ukraine. And the response was always shelling and sending, drones for just indiscriminate civilian targets for symbolism. I mean, this is terrorism. And it has to be done via an anti-terror campaign, even though it's still called a special military operation, not an all-out war like we've seen in Yugoslavia, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. It has to finish this job, because there is no trust anymore in the West, and especially in the Zelensky regime. We're three people now, including Lindsey Graham, who recently went to Kiev and said the Russians are dying. The best money we've ever spent. Apparently, that was cut up by Ukraine to the sound bites, but it was still very, very bad. He's on the wanted list in Russia. So are the ground forces commander Syrskyi and the general who we haven't seen for over a month, who was called Zaluzhny. These are clear signs that this is criminality. We have to deal with them as you do with criminals. There might be sitting down. I have two lists to share with you for peace talks, but we have points to make. These are prerequisites. And the first one came from the deputy MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Galuzin, which was return to neutral non-bloc status for Ukraine, refuse to join EU and NATO, recognize the new territorial realities, which is the new oblasts, protection of rights for Russian-speaking and other minorities, that includes the Hungarians, Russian as a second state language. That's it. I think that's very realistic. And anybody could agree to that, but not the current Kiev regime. Now, the answer was from Podolyak, who we all like because he's an egomaniac. Here's our requisites to sit down for peace talks. 1, immediate and full withdrawal from all of the 1991 territory of Ukraine. Final recognition of the USSR's collapse, which is interesting because we've had some news over there, and the post-Soviet state sovereignty, which isn't codified in international law. Extradition of military criminals and authors of the conflict, okay, securing a DMZ, a demilitarized zone of 100 to 120 kilometers within the soil of Russia, okay, reducing offensive weapons, which means long-range missiles, international conference on the control of Russian nuclear forces, good luck with that, a legally fixed reparation program, and a voluntary renunciation of Russian assets arrested in favor of Ukraine, the stolen wealth given to Ukraine. That's his modest list of demands before he sits down to the table. There is no sitting down when you are faced with this kind of demand. You know, just compare the two lists. Yeah, it has to finish. I think most Russians would agree with that, wouldn't they? I've been keeping an eye on public opinion, but yeah, we have to end this. I think that's the public opinion, isn't it?
Well, I think public opinion, it's well noted here, and it's even been reported somewhat in parts of the West. Putin's favorability with the Russian
83.
people is about 81 percentile right now. It's been there since the beginning of the special military operation. And prior to that, for almost his entire term as president, it's been in the 65th percentile. So he's incredibly popular, has overwhelming support from the Russian people. I would say this: the Russian people want peace. They want the killing to stop. Yes. They understand that Ukrainians are their brothers in blood. They're Slavs. They don't want to see any more of their boys and girls killed. Yet, I do believe that more and more the Russian population realizes that it's their survival that's at stake. It's been made very clear by the United States of America through the mouths and out of the mouths of people from Biden to Blinken to Jake Sullivan to Lloyd Austin to General Milley to people like Lindsey Graham, even John McCain, RIP, thank God. They all stated very clearly the goal was to neutralize Russia, to bring about regime change, and to balkanize Russia. What the United States wants,
They published maps to this effect. Yes, sorry, with little flags about the decolonization. They use our word, decolonizing Russia, which is that is the statehood in jeopardy, isn't it? That's the definition.
Yeah, and you know, now with the thawing of the Arctic, and the Arctic about to become two things: one, a major transit area for goods and oil, but also Russia controls the largest section of land along the Arctic that is rich in oil. And the United States sees that resource is something it wants. And so I think many Russians are becoming aware of this. I'm certain that Putin and his inner circle and his generals, and I think there are dissenters in all of those areas, they realize that this is a fight for the survival of Mother Russia. And Russia, as you said, and I agree, is in no position to compromise itself or its base of objectives. Now,
Could I expand on that a little bit? Because I
yeah, go ahead.
just 2 years ago, I didn't much like Putin. I knew that he saved Russia from the disaster of the 1990s, but for me, he was too open to compromise, and he was. But since the beginning of the SMO, he met with the mothers of the fallen soldiers and said, I'm sorry, I made a mistake by trusting the West. And that's when he became new Putin. And since the Russian motherland, which is different from the state, the motherland is threatened. That's why every Russian are completely 110% with Vladimir Putin, even though they see Ukrainians as, well, fellow Slavs, but also hostages of this hateful Bandera ideology, which cannot stay. I mean, what they're fighting for, I read this in a Russian thread, and it's just beautiful. We don't fight for because we hate what's in front of us. We fight because we love what's behind us. And that to me encapsulates it. And I've seen all of a series of videos that you sort of hinted at, with the Russian soldiers on the front line saying, what's your opinion about Ukrainians? And they say, we're one people, we're brothers, we don't want to kill them, but they have been taken hostage by this project, 30 years of anti-Russia hatred, and we have to fight. It's terrible, but it had to decisively end.
Yeah, you mentioned Putin changing. It's well known for many years, since he became president, he wanted Russia to become part of NATO, be part of the entire global West. He kept calling them, until just recently, partners.
Yes, you noticed too.
And oh yeah, it's been very clear. And you're absolutely right. Perhaps the date was when he met with the mothers of those who had fallen, and he admitted that he'd made a mistake. Many Russians here believe that Russia should have done something in 2014, which would have eliminated more than 20,000 deaths in the Donbass, would have eliminated, really, it's hundreds of thousands of deaths now in this conflict in Ukraine. And I think the other thing that made Putin completely aware that he had been taken, and there was no more hope in his mind for being a partner of the United States or the West, was the violation of the Minsk agreement, when Merkel and Hollande came out and said it was just a tactic to delay so that Ukraine could be properly equipped and prepared for a war with Russia.
Exactly right.
So I think those two things, in my mind, changed Putin's view of the world, view of the West, and his own personal diplomatic orientation to the East. And he's made that clear in many statements just in this, since 2023, January in 2023, it's become incredibly clear. Now, I want
to just on a side note, if you take a Putin, just look at Medvedev, because I remember him being a Europe-loving liberal, a dove, and just look at what he's playing this act, really playing it up, hamming it up, but he's been remarkable on social media.
Yeah, he's been one of those liberal, Western-leaning, pro-democracy guys.
Not anymore.
Now Putin is playing good cop and Medvedev is playing bad cop. We're going to use all of our arsenal, our military, our nuclear arsenal. We have hypersonic weapons, and the Ukraine, the United Kingdom, London should be targeted, as well as Brussels, and even the United States. This guy, I've maintained, and I don't know whether you agree with this or not, nobody who speaks publicly speaks on their own or as some rogue agent in Russia. I believe that all of this is very carefully coordinated, choreographed, and calibrated. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree, and we can add Yevgeny Prigozhin to that list as well. The Wagner PMC's founder, who in the West they are calling Putin's chef because he's a restaurateur, and all of the Shoigu, where's my where's my shells? I can say it right now because Bakhmut has fallen to these convicts with shovels. Artyomovsk. That was all for show. It was all for the benefit of the AFU. So yes, I completely agree with you there, and I've had that feeling for a while. This is coordinated. It's sort of trolling. Yes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting. You mentioned Prigozhin after his rant, his expletive laden rant against Shoigu, against Gerasimov, and really indirectly against Putin. When Wagner finally took Artyomovsk with the support of Russian troops and Air Force,
Yes.
Putin congratulated both of them. First, Prigozhin and Wagner, and then the Russian troops. I found that very interesting. So Putin, behind the scenes, he's never overreacting. He's very patient, very calm, very calculating, and very diplomatic. The end of this conflict with Prigozhin was he thanked them both. I thought this was
Yes, and
really
handed
quite
out some awards. And handed out some awards for the
yeah,
liberation of Artyomovsk.
yeah. All right. Let's talk about something that happened today, and it's been happening now a couple of times. Moscow was again hit with a drone attack.
Yes.
There were several of them. Two apparently got through and did some minor damage to an apartment building, a civilian area of a suburb of Moscow. Putin today publicly said, well, our air defense services did an okay job, but we need to do better. Now, I am no military strategist. I'm no expert on aeronautics. I'm no expert on drones. But I cannot believe, with Russia's advanced air defenses and radar, that these dozen or so drones and the ones that attacked the Kremlin came all the way from Ukraine. I do not believe that. I believe that there are sleeper cells, there are rat lines, there are Ukrainian partisans funded, commanded, and directed by the SBU, Ukrainian Secret Services, and ultimately approved by Zelensky. Ben, from where you're sitting, do you think these drones are really coming from Ukraine? Do you think that Zelensky has personally authorized these attacks? What are your thoughts?
Regis, I I am of two minds on this subject. First, I intend to agree with you, while also not being any kind of military or avionics expert, that's a long way to travel where S-400s are stationed that can pinpoint any one of these. So it could have been within the state of Russia, and then the FSB has some cleaning up work to do. But I also entertain an alternate a theory which is based on recent events. I mean, I don't know if your viewers know there was this little incursion into Belgorod, which got on Twitter something like the People's Republic of Bilhorod was trending for about 2 hours. Then 70 people were killed. The column was destroyed, and they had to retreat, which was complete desperation because there is no counteroffensive. They're getting desperate, and when they get desperate, they do stupid things. And I wonder if there is another version of events in which Vladimir Putin knew these drones were on the way, but wanted the people of Moscow to see them, so he only jammed it when they started jamming, and I know all of them have been destroyed, and thank God no lives have been lost. But even though he said we need to improve air defenses, I wonder if there's another version of events where it was allowed to come to Russia to say, look at what these idiots are doing, both for the people in Moscow and for the stupid West, who immediately said, panicking, that we don't support attacking Russian territory. Then there's the the bobbleheads in Ukraine, which I think it was Podolyak, or Reznikov. Podolyak said, we have no relation to the drone attack on Moscow. It's none of our business, even though like a couple of days ago, that head of the GUR, the main military intelligence directorate, said that we will have revenge and you will see it soon. I think that was Danilov, that guy. And then we hear two other things that happened within Ukraine. Kiev has been hit by those diminishing rockets from Russia for 2 weeks now straight. Apparently, 2 Patriot systems can do nothing against hypersonic Kinjal dagger missiles, and 2 of them have been taken out. Only 3 have been delivered. That's a terrible news for Raytheon, the makers of them, who have plunged in all the month of May. Their stocks have plunged. Bad news for the West, so it's for television. And I don't know if it was from the land of Russia or for Ukraine, but I do know it was meant for the television, like a PR stunt. So I wonder if we'll ever know which one of those holds, if it's from the territory of Russia or straight from Ukraine and allowed to travel. What do you think?
Yeah, wow. I don't know what to think yet. It's the first time I've heard that particular
It's an alternative
version
theory.
of alternative version. Ben, I've come to the conclusion now for several months, at least since the beginning of this year, it's impossible to know what to believe, what is true, what is false, what is a distortion, what is fake. And I've come to the conclusion, as you just said, we're going to have to just wait and see. And
That is
maybe
the best approach, isn't it? Yeah.
and maybe it will never come out. I've given up on speculating, but I do think there are some things that we've been talking about that have nothing to do with speculation, that have absolutely everything to do with the facts on the ground, as anybody who is objective can see. Now, another thing about this attack, the drone attack, Putin also said, we decided to attack the command center in Kiev on Sunday. And people are saying, well, perhaps another desperation attempt by Kiev to retaliate from that command center. We haven't heard yet how devastating that blow was. Was it as devastating as the one a few weeks ago on that underground bunker? It was hit by a Kinzhal missile that destroyed not only the bunker, but 300 to 400 Americans, Canadians, Germans, Brits, other mercenaries, all command level people in that command center. It's very interesting. We may never find out.
I wonder, but there are videos circulating on Telegram, on Twitter, that the road, the traffic towards that building is blocked, so you can't even see it. Like that building, you can't see how it was hit, or you can't even get there, which is the GUR, the main intelligence, where the Danilov's place that apparently got hit. I wonder if it's as big as what people don't talk about, the Klemnitsky, I think, attack, which was an ammo warehouse with a huge mushroom going into the sky. I'd never
Some
seen
people
anything
thought
like
it. Some people compared that to one of the atomic bomb tests down in the Marshall Islands in Bikini Atoll.
It looked like that.
It did. I thought it was. I couldn't believe it was a mushroom cloud. So who knows? All right. I want to go on to another topic that is becoming big news here in Russia. And a friend of mine, a friend of our show, Dateline News and Conversation, Dr. Vladimir Kozin, is an expert on all things nuclear treaties, weapons, and war. He has been issuing a daily report, and I think he's up to something like 200 or 151 or 152 now. And his report from, I think it was yesterday, was all about the release of avian flu, bird flu, from some of the biological labs of the United States and Ukraine that have been studying the DNA of Slavic people in order to target them with deadly pathogens. Now, what was reported here in Russia is there have been several cases of bird flu among humans, reportedly in all regions of Russia. Now, it's not an epidemic or a pandemic by any means, but it was also reported that millions and millions of chickens were euthanized because of this bird flu. Have you heard anything about this in Hungary? And what are your thoughts on this? I think this is huge news because I've been following this the report on the United States biolabs in Ukraine since
the
before the
beginning.
conflict.
Oh, I see.
So what are your thoughts?
I completely agree with you that this is historic. This is monumental. People in the West can downplay these kinds of crimes. But it will be crimes, obviously, for some time now. But when this war ends, I mean, you know, the ICC issued the arrest warrant for Putin, which is the most unserious, stupid thing to do. They don't know that Russia is collecting evidence everywhere it goes in the form of documents, smartphone footage, everything. And there will be tribunals, already have been, for the Azov people in Donbass, for all perpetrators of crimes against Russia. And a biological crime is enormous and unforgivable among them. And the other big player paying attention to this is obviously China, because whatever one thinks of the origin of the pandemic we've been through, it's obvious that from day one, it was blamed on China. And they do not take that lightly. So they are very keenly interested in these so-called peaceful factories, Victoria Nuland admitted to, peaceful biolabs in Ukraine, as well as all over Africa. And they also have the documentation, and Russia does. So I think it's collected and will be presented at the opportune time. And the people who perpetrate the evil policies, I haven't heard about the human version of the bird flu yet. I heard about the many chickens being euthanized, but there will be consequences for this. There have to be, because it's not the old world order where the US decided it can do anything and set the rules for everybody else. That's done. And they don't quite realize it yet, that all their dirty tricks, they're going to come out into the open sooner or later in a tribunal brought to you mostly near Russia or China. That is my firm belief. And that is the way everything is going, because as you know, Europe has incredible inflation. In Hungary, electricity is okay. In Germany, not so much. Food is high. Russia has the lowest inflation in all of Europe. And all of the policies they're making, everybody, I just wanted to bring in that the beginning of the SMO was hastened in 2014 by Gennady Zyuganov and the KPRF, who I would have supported with my vote before all this. They wanted to urge something like this. And since then, Russia rebuilt half of Mariupol. So this is a net loss for them. But during a war, they can do that. They can make agreements left and right, lowered the age for larger families for retirement, pensions, young families under 30. When their first child is born, they get a certificate for a car. These are wonderful things. The educational system has returned from the Bologna system back to the Soviet one, basically, a more advanced version. There is something called Gosplan 2.0 for the arms, what do you call them? The AZ infrastructure. What is the military industrial complex in the West, but in Russia it serves the state, is on a planned basis now, once again. These are all moves in the right direction. And that means that this, what was it? The ruble will be rubble, and Russia's economy is in tatters. Tatters, I tell you, those dreams will never come true. It's already done. They're just kicking and screaming at this point. So my view, as soon as this comes to an end, which I think is much closer than most people think, there will be a price to pay. That's my view.
Yeah, I think so too, and I can concur because our friend Dr. Vladimir Kozin has been reporting on this since actually before the special military operation regarding the biolabs in Ukraine. I've had several guests on prior to the SMO who are experts on the treaties against biological and chemical weapons. And they have exposed a great deal about these United States biolabs, not only in Ukraine, but in parts of the world. Uh, so I do agree, and our friend Dr. Kozin has been keeping track of the documentation that Russia has been taking and keeping, as it has captured many of these biological labs. They found documents, they found letters, they found computers that were just left. And so they do have reams and boxes of information that I think they will use at the conclusion of this conflict. And it's always the victors that convene the criminal war trials. And I
Exactly
think
right.
it's going to be obvious when this is over that Russia will be the victor. I
Exactly
want
right.
to,
May I add a little bit to this
you
before we
can
move on?
always add a little bit to this.
Okay, thank you, because I completely agree with that. But one person who I respect, but also kind of feel bad for all the time, is the permanent representative to the UN for Russia, which is Nabenzia. Because he tried to introduce these documents. He always tries to bring up these topics. And for now, Ukraine says we are victorious. Once there's victory, we can talk. For now, the West is just ignoring these evident facts, these documents, without any dignifying it with any response. Because for now, they can do that. But once the wind actually changes in this war, I think they will have to pay attention to the victor. I just wanted to add that. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would add this to that. Russia is far more accomplished and experienced diplomatically than anybody from the West. Certainly, everybody from the United States is an intellectual midget compared to Russia's diplomats. Um, and Russia has been introducing all of this information for the record. It will be preserved for the record, historical record in the United Nations. And when this is over, it's the plan, the foundation of the plan for a multipolar world to be built upon a renewed United Nations, the principles of the United Nations. So I just hope, Ben, that I live to see
Me too.
the conclusion of this and the implementation of a new equal.
Renewed and reformed UN. That's what it should be.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
I
Okay,
mean,
now go ahead.
I think I haven't been born. I haven't lived on this earth enough, as much as Lavrov has been the diplomat of the world. I think he has more than 50 years experience. He is the diplomat in the world, as well as Wang Yi, and these are, as you said, midgets. The material of leadership in the West, which includes the EU and US, is just pathetic. Look at someone like Blinken. Look at that Kirby with the wobbling head. Look at the NATO guy who looks like he needs a piss break anytime, Jan Stoltenberg. Look at Olaf Scholz. I mean, this is ridiculous. Or that guy in Canada, Justin Trudeau. Yeah, they're midgets, but they're used to having their way without a plan, without any know-how. That's the difference.
Yeah, they're just gatekeepers for the cabal that tell them exactly what to do and reward them handsomely. All right, the final thing I want to talk about. I'm looking at a map here, Ben, and I'm looking at Hungary. Where are you located in Hungary?
I'm in the southwest in a town called Pécs, Paics. So practically, this is north, which means Serbia and Croatia are that way in about 50 kilometers. We're a neighboring state of both. In my childhood, we went over to the Sobotka, Subotica, the what do you call it, the market there to get goods from Yugoslavia, and also that way is I forgot that Croatian city, but I'll get a map of my own.
Well, that's okay. I just wanted to point out, because I'm looking at this map now, Hungary is right in the middle of what used to be the former Yugoslavia. Serbia, you border Croatia, you border Austria, you border Slovakia, you border Romania,
Yeah.
and it looks like you border Ukraine.
For now.
You are right in the middle of things.
Yes.
All right, so this is the last question I have for you tonight because I think it's a huge story. It's beginning to get really tense in Serbia. You're a neighbor. Um, you're quite far away from Kosovo. At least on the map, it looks that way.
Yes.
But tensions are rising. There was a confrontation between NATO peacekeepers and Serbs who were objecting to the election of 4 Albanian mayors in this predominantly Serbian enclave. And they're claiming that the vote was rigged. My gosh, I read that there was less than 4% voter turnout. So these people must have something to complain about. But here's the question. You know, it was NATO that bombed the hell out of Kosovo. NATO broke up Yugoslavia. It was the United States behind it. I'm going to cut the crap out. The United States has been behind it all. And I'm sure the United States is behind these tensions that are raising between Serbia and Kosovo. It's the United States that was behind Ukraine. It's the United States using its soft power in, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, in Abkhazia, uh, in Georgia. They are using their soft power, and a lot of that soft power are threats of sanctions, money, and military. It's been their modus operandi forever. Ben, from where you're sitting in Hungary, right in the middle of all of this that's happening in this part of, well, it's Western Eastern Europe. What is your opinion on what's going on now in Serbia with Kosovo, NATO, the United States?
I agree with your assessment, adding to it that the United States and the UK were a huge part in rolling back the Warsaw Pact, which destroyed my country of birth, the People's Republic of Hungary. We weren't part of Yugoslavia, we were neighbors, but they continued to exist for another 9 years. And I'm going to borrow from the great George Galloway, who I'm sure you know about, who said that Bush House in London, even since the end of World War II, broadcast in all 6 languages of the brotherly tongues of Yugoslavia straight into Yugoslavia 24 hours a day, not because they were interested in the affairs of the people there, because they wanted to sow division, to balkanize exactly what they want to do to Russia and to China. I've seen maps of decolonized China as well. And unfortunately, since Yugoslavia was then alone and weakened, it worked. But it gives me great, not, I wouldn't say pride, but relief to talk to young people. I've recently visited Slovenia and my friends there. And if I talk to young people there and young people in Croatians and Serbians here on the border, all of them agree that we external forces were responsible for us fighting. We didn't want this. They remember Tito fondly. And basically the issue is there was a ticking time bomb left on Serbian soil, which has a longer history we can't really go into, but to summarize, the Kosovo and Metohija territory was, to the south was the Albanian People's Republic, and they were already failing. You know, they built a lot of bunkers were economically very bad shape, and they started migrating in. And the UN apparently, but it's basically the US, decided on the borders. There was no referenda like there were in the 4 oblasts in southern Ukraine. It's still not mostly recognized. It's like the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan, who has like 5 countries out of 200 recognize it. That's exactly the same for Kosovo and Metohija. It's basically a barracks. Not many people living there. Just a hornet's nest, ready to create, to be ignited, to create trouble for Serbia. And what has Serbia done since the beginning of the special military operation in Ukraine? They have refused to sanction Russia. And apparently in the EU blob, that is something that will get you attacked or outed or your money. I mean, we're experiencing this now. We're in the same shoes, Hungary and Serbia, is if you don't follow the rules, you will get punished on one way or the other. So I see it simply as revenge against Vucic, who is a very Western leaning fellow, but even he knows that Serbians cannot be a part of NATO because they cannot sanction Russia. They are the greatest Russian flags are flown in Belgrade, the big Z symbols, everything. They are the closest brotherly nation to Russians, and Europe knows this and hates it. And since we've emerged on trying to play a bit to the west, a bit to the east, kind of like the dancing Erdogan, but now seeing that the east is where the sun is rising, we are getting the same punishment. That's what Europe is. The main category for entry into Europe right now is not democracy, it's not rule of law or values, it's hating Russia. And Serbia and Hungary don't hate Russia. So I guess we are pariah states now. That's my take on that one. But it saddened me to see that those KFOR soldiers, who are not under the command of us, not under Orban's or the president's command, but under NATO, were Hungarians. And they got a well-deserved beating from unarmed Serbs in that region.
Yeah.
And I just hope they can calm down. Yeah.
Well, I do too. We don't need any more killing. We don't need any more racial or ethnic wars going on and divisions. We don't need the United States and the West playing ethnic groups off against each other as they're doing everywhere. It's really terrible. You mentioned the UK. It's an interesting topic that we have just a couple of minutes left. The question is the tail wagging the dog? In other words, who is it? Is it the British Empire still using the United States as its battering ram? Or is it the United States using a once big empire as its vassal, its partner in crime? It's interesting because I do believe that the UK, the city, the Bank of London, and MI6 are all part of this globalist cabal that are trying to create this new world order. You will have nothing and you will be happy. Your final thoughts, Ben?
Mr. Klaus Schwab, I will not eat the bugs, is my final say on that. But yes, I agree that the tail wagging the dog is an interesting way to put it. There are elements, I think, in London who believe in the might. Like Boris Johnson was sent to America to woo over like the Republican senators to continue funding Ukraine, which was an interesting move. But the City of London and Wall Street really have always been bedfellows, and there's a lot of agreement between the two. But I mean, who knows? They're making a fool of themselves here in Europe, that's for sure, because I recently read an article that Brexit was at least half responsible for the current food crisis they're experiencing, which, comes to mind when you think about the Russian grain situation and fertilizer. I'm sure that has nothing to do with it. But yeah, they are the second most suffering country economically since the beginning of the war. So wag that tail, little puppy. I don't know what you're thinking, Little Britain. They have an aircraft carrier that broke down again, I think, and it's basically like a floating scrapyard now. That's the might of Britain.
Ben, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. We'll look forward to having you again real soon.
I was glad to be here. Thank you for the